So first, to remind you, I mean, I think some of you were here yesterday, but not maybe everybody. So what we were, the basic sort of picture or framing of the problematic that we had yesterday was basically that the idea we've been trying to articulate is that there's in some sense, a kind of love between human beings that's always there, whatever we do, which doesn't mean, of course, romantic love. I mean, it can turn into that maybe, but the love in this basic sense is more something like the way in which human beings matter to and concern each other, the way in which human beings address each other. So that for instance, if something bad happens to somebody, I will be, it will pain me, I will be concerned by it, I will respond to it, that we are not indifferent to each other. We are never really indifferent to other human beings. So there's always something, a kind of contact between us and an understanding. There's an understanding is part of it, that you see immediately when somebody is hurt, for instance, you understand that they are hurt. So we are not mysteries to each other in this sense. So there's this kind of love, caring, mattering between human beings all the time. And that's what makes, as it were, human life possible at all. This is what makes meaning, understanding, being alive, what it is for human beings. And we can't do anything about it. It's always there. And if it wasn't there, there would be no human life. So that's the first thing. And then the other thing is that, of course, that if you want to call it love, as we have suggested, you could call this a kind of basic kind of love. That doesn't mean, of course, that we are always treating each other very lovingly. I mean, we can treat each other in terrible ways. We can be evil towards each other and want to cause somebody pain, for instance. Not because we don't understand that we are causing them pain, but because for whatever motives we want to cause the other pain. You know, there's sadism exists. So that's quite possible. But then when we do that kind of thing, when we do act terribly towards each other, when we are destructive in different ways, that means, this is the suggestion, it doesn't prove that this love isn't there. What it means is that we have to go against this love, this caring that we also feel for each other all the time. Even when we do terrible things to others, we have to go against this love in ourselves. So always when we are destructive in different ways, that will, you could say it leaves a trace, but that's maybe too weak. It's that it tears us apart when we do that. So we can't, like you can't, for instance, you can wholeheartedly, with all your being, you can embrace somebody and you can love them. But when you do terrible things to them, when you try to close yourself off to the other person, then you can't do that with your whole being, because what you have to do then is to try to repress, push aside the love that you still feel for them, even when you do bad things to them. So then you have to go against something in yourself, so that it creates a split in yourself when you do bad things, when you go against this love. And it comes out, you feel it as bad conscience, for instance, that you even when you do terrible things to people, you feel that this is not right. You feel bad about it. So, okay. And then I think a further suggestion would be that we probably will talk more about today, is that this kind of destructiveness is going against this love that's always there between all human beings, is very much part of what creates human culture. So human culture is not just and not basically a good thing. I mean, it's not just a bad thing either, not just an evil thing, but there's a lot of destructiveness in human cultures, as such, that comes out in many different ways. But because destructiveness has this character that you also go against something in yourself, that's why it doesn't feel very nice to live in a culture. There's lots of difficulties about it. You feel, like Freud said, that there's this Unbehagen in der Kultur, that there are these disquiets, these anxieties, bad feelings going on in culture all the time. It creates tensions in cultures. And this, our suggestion would be that this is because there's this going against the love that everybody always also feels towards others. Okay, So concretely, how does that come out? And today I at least will focus quite a lot on examples from sexual life, which is, I mean, you could take examples from, whatever area of life, as it were, but I'll take examples, at least at first, from sexual relations. Which, of course, by the way, sexuality is not the same as love, and one question is, how are they related? They are not the same, but they are related, because if there was no love, then sexuality would have no meaning. If people weren't important to each other in the sense that love makes us important to each other, then sexuality would be like scratching your head or something. I mean, it would have no meaning and no difficulties in it. It could not, break people apart like sexuality always does, not always, but often does. That people have enormous difficulties and troubles with sexuality, and that's, I would say, because love is involved. If there was no love, it would be like scratching. There would be no problem with it. You scratch if it itches. Okay, so first I'd like to start then with one thing that's actually, I think, very prevalent in sexual life, which is perversion. And it's, I think, as I'll try to explain, it's much more prevalent than we usually think. So what then is perversion? Take the most classic example of perversion, fetishism, and the most classic example of fetishism, the shoe fetish. Like some guy the only way he can get it on is by having a lady's shoe, a high-heeled shoe, and he's jerking off to that shoe. That's like, and if you're really a real shoe fetishist, that's the only way you can, get it on, get excited. And now, so what's going on in that kind of situation? So obviously, in the most obvious sense, his sexual excitement is about the shoe. But why? I mean, it's not. Why is it just shoes, for instance, and not something else? And so the first point here is that obviously the shoe is exciting for this guy only because of the woman's foot that was in that shoe. So it's the woman who is exciting to him, really. That's why it's women's shoes and not any kind of, flip-flops or whatever. You can have, of course, a flip-flop fetish as well, but then it's still the woman's or the man's or whatever turns you on. It's always the person who was in that shoe. The human being who was in that shoe is really what turns you on. But the difficulty is, and this would be like the suggestion of what's going on in fetishism, is that precisely because we have difficulties with we are afraid of approaching human beings directly. Like the fetishist is afraid of real women. He can't, because if the real woman is there with the shoes on, he can't get it on because he's too afraid to, go near and touch a real woman, a real human being. So that's why he has to take just the shoe away, so the woman is somewhere there, and he doesn't have to go close to her, but then it's safe enough to have the shoe for him. So because the other human being has been taken away, but still as an idea, like she's still there, and it's the only thing that gives the shoe any meaning. The shoe in itself has no meaning. So this, I would suggest, and this is something that Robert Stoller, he's a psychoanalyst and has done a lot of research on sexuality and perversions. This is basically his idea, and I think it's right. His definition of what a perversion is that he says that a perversion is a dehumanization of the other person. You turn the other person into a sexual object in a way, precisely insofar as you dehumanize, depersonalize the other person. And you do that in order to feel safe enough to get excited. Because the other person, if you had the real other person of flesh and blood there, who can respond to you in all kinds of ways, then you feel too frightened to be excited. So you have to depersonalize, reduce the other person to, in the shoe fetishist's case, you reduce the other person to their shoe, and then you can have all kinds of other fetishes, of course. For instance, you can still have the other person there, but they will have to be whatever, dressed in a particular way. Only if there's leather involved, can somebody get excited. Or only if there's absolutely no leather involved, it should be only vanilla and romantic music and lightning should be a particular kind. So you have all kinds of like limits that a fetishist or the pervert always puts on the sexual encounter. Only if you can like make rules for how things will happen and what will happen. Only then does it get safe enough for the pervert to get excited. And again, as vanilla sexuality. That's like this concept, I think, or
Did you say
vanilla sexuality. Like I think that's the usual term for somebody who isn't like in a normal sense pervert at all. Like there should be nothing special, just like this romantic Hollywood idea of what lovemaking should be. And then you call it, of course, lovemaking and not fucking, because that's already would be, too scandalous. But vanilla is not an opposite to perversion. It's just one kind of perversion, quite obviously, because it's immediately when there's, like, for instance, whatever, that somebody is not properly washed or has body hair or whatever, the really vanilla person will get, frightened, because for them that kind of thing is too much human and too, reminds them or makes it obvious that here is a whole other human being, and that's frightening. And then again, somebody else might, that there must be body hair and somebody must be really dirty, because otherwise they can't get it on. But again, in all these cases, whatever the specific form of it, or the like content of the perversion, the point is that the pervert has his own or her own idea, a fantasy script of what the encounter should be like, that they have decided already for themselves that this is how it must be for it to be safe enough for me to get excited. And that always means that I have to be the one who decides, the limits of what happens. That I already know that nothing else, I already know what will happen. I mean, of course, not completely, because then it gets boring, but more or less you have that's what you need, an idea that things can't get out of hand. I already know what will happen. Because if you have a whole a complete human being there, which is what you, of course, always in fact have, then you never know what will happen. What they might suggest, whatever, that you never thought of, or you can't control it. But perversion is always the attempt to try to control and limit what will happen in the sexual encounter.
Sure. Struck me, I mean, together it's the same thing, but could you say that in the basic structure of logic of the fetish you have, that it's important that exactly the trace of the other thing is there being true, or in all kinds of ways, and I gather in exactly the way to put that this as a safe space, but maybe also in the sense that there's a kind of that exactly the fantasy instead, because the other person, if you leave out, if you as a work, if you just have the other person, then you can't have your fantasy. I guess some people that, but if you mold other person in one way or another, it believes us would trace the others, and there's like a empty space or some kind of area that does not feel what the real other person, but that gives us a space where you can the presence of your fantasy living still. So that's
yeah, you could put it that way, I think. And precisely, I mean, fantasy is, of course, very crucial here. I mean, perversion is a fantasy game as such. And what is a fantasy? Well, a fantasy is a kind of, fantasies can sometimes be very conscious and explicit, like in a sexual daydream or whatever, or you read a porn magazine and you will see, or well, there's not porn magazines anymore, but go to the internet, you will see all kinds of fantasy scripts being like acted out. And they are always scripted in different ways, and so you can look for a particular kind of porn, of course. This kind, I don't know, whatever, stepbrother, stepsister fantasy, or this kind of fantasy, or that kind of fantasy, whatever. So you already, all of this is perverse in precisely this sense that people have scripted the encounter in a certain kind of way, and then they feel safe enough to engage in it. And that always, right, so fantasy is a game of ideas, right? It's thoughts. So this is what's very, in a way, very strange if you think about it, because of course, in some sense, sexuality is about, and still even for the pervert, sexuality is about actual human contact. Two human beings who are, living beings who are in contact with each other and respond, again, are addressed by and address each other, respond to each other. I mean, it's a caress and you respond to the caress in whatever way you do. So there's actual contact between living beings. That's not an idea thing. It has nothing to do with ideas. It has to do with just, a caress is not an idea. But it's not only material either. It's like two souls touching each other. Just it's incarnated. That's what, it's not, just physical at all. Again, to turn it into just physical is a kind of idea in itself. It's also a way of like reducing the other person. If you think about sexuality only in terms of, well, it's just purely physical, purely animal, blah, blah, this kind of thing, idea. That's a complete idea because it's not true. We are not just purely physical. There's the whole human being there, which means body and soul in one. So if you imagine, fantasize sexuality as only physical, that's idealism, I would say. It's an idea of what it is. And again, that means that it's a perversion in itself to think about sexuality as purely physical. That's one way of reducing away the other person. But again, leaving the trace of the other person, as to put it as Niklas did. Because again, these idea games don't have any meaning, again, except for the actual other person. I mean, that's why you also, otherwise people could just sit at home and fantasize, just think out these things. But they actually, search out other people to be together with, but only through that fantasy, as it were. So the other person becomes a kind of, the other person's body, if you talk about sexuality, becomes a kind of stage on which you, enact your fantasy scenario. So the other person is just, again, you use the other person as a tool to create your own fantasy. And again, the other person probably does the same to you. I mean, two perverts meeting and they have different fantasies, but maybe they can be like combined and both feel very happy, but they have actually lived in completely different worlds during that encounter because they have different fantasies, different ideas about it. So the other person is in this sense used as the stage for your own fantasy script. But at the same time, it's essential that there is this other person. I mean, even for the shoe fetishists, the actual woman has had to be there at some point to have her foot in the shoe. Because otherwise, if you just have ideas, they don't live. They come alive because there's a living human being there at some point, in some way, to give the fantasy life. Do you want to ask? Yeah.
I was thinking about some kind of fetishism like furries, for example.
Like what?
Furries.
Furs. Yeah.
Like they are attracted to the animal, not like the person that is inside the costume.
Yeah.
Or I saw once a documentary in Helsinki about a man that was attracted to his car, and like there's no
Yeah. Well, but are you sure there isn't? Because obviously, I mean, you could say that on the face of it, you could say that about the shoe too. Well, he just likes shoes. He doesn't care about people. But the point is that somebody's foot has been in the shoe, as it were. And isn't the car? I mean, you could have all kinds of course, very complicated ways in which an object like a car becomes invested with sexual fantasies. That is, I think it means that it becomes invested somehow with the presence of of people. It's never just the car. I mean, and in the case of the car, of course, it's very easy to see at least one aspect of that because, I mean, it's common. It's a commonplace, right, to say that what is a car for a man? Well, it's an extension of his penis. So, I mean, whether it's true or not, but it's very common, that kind of idea that the car is a kind of substitute for or a symbol for sexuality. You have a big car, that means you have a big dick. you know, that's why a man driving in a small car is like pathetic. I mean, not really pathetic, but if you have that kind of fantasy, and it's very common, I think, then it's like that. That's why you give women typically small cars. They drive around in small cars, and the man should drive in a biggest possible car. Obviously, that's a kind of sexual fantasy. So, and I don't know about this, who has an actual, you know, a real car fetish. I don't know how it came out. Does he sit and jerk off in his car or whatever? But, so maybe, I mean, that's different from the typical kind of, you know, penis extension idea of the car, but it's related, I would think, somehow. And the furry animals, of course, one point is that that we, of course, we do have like, I mean, everybody is, we love animals too. I mean, we don't just kill them just like that and as though it didn't matter at all. We can feel pity for animals, and we can want to, you know, I don't know, cuddle a dog and so on. So it's not so strange if sometimes, and maybe it happens more often than you would think, it also becomes sexual between people and animals. So that's one thing, that because they are living beings, they are not ideas, they are not objects, they are living beings. So we have a contact to them. But then you can just come in just in a minute. But then that doesn't exclude that that people are also involved in your. If you can only be, you know, if you have a fur fetish, or you can, well, a fur would, by the way, it's of course represents the animal, or somebody else who can only, I don't know, they can only have sex with their dog or cat. I don't know. I'm sure that exists. So why is that? Wouldn't that be also because they are afraid of actual contact with human beings, you know, adult human beings, because they can respond in all kinds of ways that are frightening and they can't be in control. Whereas a dog or a cat, they don't judge you at all. They don't, you know, criticize you. So it's much easier to be with them. And maybe I would think perhaps that, let's say, pedophilia, it has that kind of aspect too. That if you are too frightened to be with adult human beings, adult men, adult women, then you can be maybe with children, because they can be, you know, they also don't criticize and judge you, and you have power over them in a way you don't have over adult human beings. So that could be one, as it were, reason why somebody could become a pedophile. I think there's something to it. At least there's. I once talked to a pedophilia researcher, and she said that there's like basically two kinds of pedophiles, and one kind is people who have just been very abused as children, not sexually, but just so, you know, being beaten up and so on. So they are really frightened of adults. Adults just represent, you know, violence to them. So they can only feel safe enough to get turned on when they are with children. And of course, by the way, none of this is to excuse anything. Any of this I mean, pedophilia is terrible, of course, but just to understand what's the dynamics. Why might it be attractive to somebody? But you had a question.
Yes, sorry, first for my English. Thinking about the scared feeling and thinking about the Pygmalionic myth. I mean, this thing of changing the object of desire, right, of the subject, the person, to the image, because
Yeah.
the image is static. Thinking about how digitality and how internet,
Yeah.
pornos and sexual games and all that, because internet is like the world of images. Thinking about how is there's like does digitality promote like I don't know, like an action or promote modernism or promote like sexuality, but not sexuality of material approach, person approach, but images like Pygmalionic, let's say, myth.
Yeah, I think it does. I mean, well, obviously it gives all kinds of technically new possibilities for that kind of precisely, as you say, reducing the other to an image. And that, of course, always existed. I mean, we have had pornographic pictures in I don't know, in all civilizations, I think they exist, pornographic art and so on. So you have an image that you can look at and get turned on by. So that's not new, but that we have it on this scale and that we can like personalize it and it can feel, and there it's interesting that, I mean, it's quite frightening. It might very well be that people, you know, in 10 years' time, that a lot of people will just sit at home in front of their screen with, you know, an image, a virtual partners, and just be like content with that because you can now make it feel, not feel, I think, but make it look so real that it's, you know, almost like the real thing. And that's, of course, the whole point of perversion, that it should be as close as possible to the real thing, but not real. So there shouldn't be the real human being, as it were, at least not the real human being. If there's a real human being, they must be controlled by your own fantasy script. So, but the more real they can become, and you still know that they are not actually real, the better it is. And of course, a virtual partner is fucking perfect. I mean, you know, there's no reality there. You can decide completely what happens. But then, when you have AI and they can, like, you know, talk to you as though they were your real, you know, a real human being, and all the time, you know, they are not. Well, I mean, it's like the most perfect perversion machine you could imagine is AI and the internet. So I think that's true. And of course, it will also happen not just in sexual relations, but in, you know, instead of having your real friends who are just a bother and don't always, you know, they don't, you know, you have your problems and you want to tell your friends all the time and they get tired of you and you get tired of them. So what's better than to have a virtual friend who will always be there and listen to you and always have these nice things to say to you and forever, no demands at all. And if, you know, so there's nothing to be afraid of. You only get what you want, which is not what you would need, and it's not real. And the whole point is that none of it is real, but you can imagine that it is real. Or, well, you can, you don't really imagine it's real, but you can take that replacement reality, as it were, and live in that. But all the time, the point is, you know it's not real, and that's why it's nice to have it. And then it should only look real. I mean, it's and the same with, I don't know, prostitution or whatever is, of course, also the point that why is it so good for it's mostly men, of course, but women too nowadays, who go to prostitutes? Well, isn't the whole point there too, in the same kind of way, that it's very important that you know that the prostitute, is not really interested in you. You know, if I'm the, what's it called, the client, that I should know that I have paid for this. That means that I decide what goes on, and when I don't want it to go on, I just, you know, I don't have to. So nothing, it's not like a real encounter where whatever can happen. It can happen that maybe you get married with this person or you become enemies or whatever, but here nothing can happen, so it's completely safe. But yet, on the other hand, of course, a prostitute who was like completely business-minded, you know, acted as though she didn't care at all, that wouldn't be, you know, good for business at all. The whole point is that she should pretend that she really thinks that the client is fantastic and that he's really hot and she gets turned on by him, blah, blah. All this pretense has to be there, and yet at the same time, the whole point is that you know that it is pretense, that it's not real. So it has this kind of, fantasies always have, I think, this paradoxical structure that you know it's not real, but then it should at the same time look real. Yeah.
Real. So that's exactly this fantasy can be just that. Just
yeah.
Satisfaction, that you have this pure, as it were, satisfaction, a certain need, and then the other person is always a problem. So,
Yeah, exactly. I mean, this is the...
Photograph is exactly that everything always functions. So it's always, there's nobody, as it were, no problem, the other person never comes into your life, and that, I guess, that prostitution somehow is
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly also, because the shoe will never, but this is the same thing that you've been saying, that was just...
Yeah, this idea of right, of sex as only sex is basically the idea of sexuality as only animal, as only, you know, this kind of, that is not connected to love or to whatever, or to friendship, or to all the things that can happen between human beings. This is just sex. And of course this kind of, because that's important that it's, that you could say, I mean, you can characterize perversion as an objectification of the other, a depersonalization, a reduction of the other to their role in this, in your fantasy script, or as a, precisely as a splitting between different aspects that are not originally split, because again, sexuality is not original. If you don't have this pervert setup, sexuality is not in that sense something completely different from all the other responses we have to each other. It's, I mean, it's, I'm not saying that that sexuality, for instance, always is there between human beings. I don't think that's true, or at least it's it's arguable. But even so, sexuality is not the same as love, for instance, but it is obviously related to it. And if there's not perversion, then you don't. Perversion is part of it. Is precisely that you want to cut off sexuality, for instance, and say it has nothing to do with love. And you can have that in a whole culture. I mean, this was basically what you know, Victorian era the sexual ideology was precisely this, right? That you cut off sex from love, and this, of course, happens like typically it always happens, primarily in terms of the image of the woman, right? So the woman becomes, and it's not, of course, just Victorian times. It's Catholicism all through. Like, of course, you have the classic split of the image of the woman into the Madonna and the whore. So she's a saint or she's a whore. Again, these two, of course, you can't combine them. I mean, when you split them, how do you combine a Madonna and a whore? I mean, actual, you know, women are, of course, all kinds of things, and like actual men are all kinds of things, and can be, you know, the range of human response is like limitless. But when you split them off, then you can't really combine them. And so that's why, of course, it creates a problem, for instance, for marriage. So, okay, because you can't really marry a whore, you marry a Madonna, but then you have to also, there has to be sex also in order at least to produce children. So what do you think about, what does a Victorian or this kind of man or woman who thinks of herself in these terms, what does she think about herself when she's having sex, even when her husband? I mean, it's not, it must be terrible, because then he becomes like the prostitute's client and she becomes a prostitute, and they don't want to think about themselves in that way. Or at least then they have to split it completely from how they then think about themselves in terms of their family, their children and each other, and they respect each other. And all this, you know, putting the woman on a pedestal is, of course, the other side of then putting some other women or an aspect of every woman not on a pedestal, but, you know, pushing it down and making it as dirty as possible. That's always what happens when you have try to make somebody in some aspect pure, or some people pure. It means that you have to make other people dirty, or an aspect of the same person dirty. The dirtier you make that aspect, the cleaner you can make the other. They are like two sides of the same coin. So you can't have just pure people. To have pure people means that they make other people dirty, or make aspects of themselves dirty. So then you have this kind of split that Freud, for instance, characterizes, I think it quite well, that for the Victorians, and he was himself, of course, a Victorian, or from that age, the 19th century, that when they love, they cannot desire sexually, that is, and when they desire, they cannot love. So you have this completely schizophrenic split in each human being because of this, or through this kind of ideology. And again, if you don't have that ideology, I mean, it's not, there's no problem as such in loving somebody you also desire sexually. I mean, it's not, they aren't split originally. But again, you split them because it, in a certain sense, it makes you, you know, mad. Schizophrenia is madness to be split like this, but it also makes things, in another sense, safe, and sort of limits what can happen between human beings. Okay. And of course, well, I have to take some water. Oh, no, I'm not at all. No, I have no idea what time it is. Well, it is 11:44, so it's not so bad. Okay. So one point, by the way, here is, of course, that, and maybe it came out already, but let me say it again, that explicitly that that this kind of objectification and dehumanization, depersonalization, splitting of the other person also always means that you do the same to yourself. You know, in a sort of different way, but basically the same thing. So, I mean, if you reduce the woman to a whore, you as a man become the whore's client. You become dirty if she's dirty too. Or if you have a kind of sadomasochist, sadism, masochism, that kind of perversion, then of course you make the other your slave, but that means that you reduce yourself to a slave master. Or vice versa. So you always, it's not possible to like keep yourself as a complete, free, open human being and just reduce somebody else. When you do that to the other, you do it to yourself. And this is one aspect of precisely this point about love, that it opens us up and to each other and connects us to each other. So there's no yours and mine in love. They are the same, whatever. And then when you try to split up yours from mine, your good from my good, then it means that you split up yourself. That you always do the same to yourself, basically, as you do whatever you do to the other. So also, I mean, this point about self-objectification and perversion, I mean, if you think in terms of, let's say, and again, I mean, the point here about perversion is, or one point is that it's not something special, I think. It's like very pervasive in human sexuality and in human culture generally. So it's like normality is just one typical constellation of perversions. That's what's called normal, is just the most common, or let's say the most officially approved of constellation of perversions. That's what's normal. Then, of course, from love's perspective, I think there's no normality. There are just human beings who are not split and who are not perverse and who are trying to reach each other in whatever way they can. So that's neither, it's beyond like normality and perversion, whereas normality is itself a perversion, but it presents itself, of course, always as precisely not perverse. You know, this is how, so here you have this, the same split on a like meta level in a way, that of course, what is a really normal person? Well, that's somebody who thinks of themselves as really normal. It precisely would be like this vanilla sexuality, vanilla everything, doing everything like as a good bourgeois should, not doing anything wrong and thinking it's that they can't understand at all that there are all these perverse people who like shoes or who like whatever, like something else than vanilla sexuality. So they present themselves as completely unperverse. But that's, of course, just like, that's the obvious form of a perversion, to, you know, split yourself off from these others who are not at all like you, and you could never imagine that you would blah, blah. And of course, it's complete bullshit, because every vanilla person can imagine all these things, really. I mean, they just don't want to admit it. But I mean, I'm not saying that everybody is a shoe fetishist really deep down, but it's quite obvious that nobody is like completely, that they can't understand at all, that how could you like something, you know, different from what I happen to like. This is not true, but to present yourself as normal is to pretend to yourself and to others that all this is like completely different from who you are, and you don't understand it at all. But I don't think.
To the extent you have a very specific preference or script for whatever vanilla, if you have this vanilla, you have a specific, that's where sexuality can happen. That means somehow that you know that it can happen in all kinds of different ways, and that's why, I mean, that you're not going to, because it's possible exactly to be a pervert, then that's what you have, the vanilla sexuality. So it's somehow,
yeah.
we're already acknowledging or recognizing all of these different forms, and then it carves out its own specific.
Yeah, and I mean, at least you can say that I mean, because there is, of course, such a thing as not being genuinely not being interested in certain things, in whatever, in genuinely not being interested at all or turned on at all by sadism or masochism, for instance. I mean, I think that exists, but people who want to insist that they can't understand it at all or whatever, or turn very much against it, that's of course one form of being like fascinated by it, being actually attracted to it. I mean, the more you want to insist that you are not like that, it just shows that you in fact are like that. You know, but you don't want to admit it. So always when there's like a big tension around saying that you are not like something, it shows that you feel, you know, you are. So it's a bit like, think about, I mean, this is not perhaps a perversion as such, but it's something at least very important, I think, not in a good way important, but important in sexuality and in human life generally. Disgust, when you feel disgust with somebody. I mean, it's obvious that that's one response that people have to what they regard as perversions, you know, perversions that are not their own, that they are disgusted by them, but also we are disgusted by all kinds of things in other human beings, like ludicrous things that are not, I mean, sometimes disgust is tied to, you know, fear of actually getting infected with, you know, if there's COVID, you want to not be close to somebody who has it or whatever, but that's not really, I think that can't explain disgust, and also even in the cases where you like feel disgust towards somebody who has, let's say, an illness that you don't want to catch, why would you feel disgust? You could just be careful around them. But so immediately when you feel disgust, it means, I think, that you already feel that you are somehow like them. So if you get, and often of course disgust has nothing to do with any germs or anything like that. There's no physical danger. You just feel disgusted by a certain kind of person, and you don't want to be close to them. You feel if you go close to them, if you talk to them, if you touch them, you will immediately be infected and become like them. And so that I think means already that you feel that you somehow are already like them, but you don't want to admit it. So disgust is like, it feels like you present it to yourself as though here this disgusting person is somebody who I'm not at all like them. I want nothing to do with them, I'm not at all like them. But what it actually says, you know, the logic of it is that you already feel that you are exactly like them. But that must not come out, you know, it must not be shown. And so you must, you know, pretend that you are not like them at all. So disgust is a kind of feeling of intimacy with the disgusting other, the kind of intimacy that you want to deny because you don't want to know that about yourself, that you are actually, you know, like them or together with them, the same as them. Okay. Right. So. So okay, so if I mean, again, taking like the question of how important this kind of perverse fantasy logic is in like normal human life and normal sexuality. Already this the whore Madonna thing, of course, is a very central structuring feature, I think, of the classical Western idea of the woman. It's starting to be, it's not so dominant anymore, but it's obviously still there in many ways. And then there's others too. I mean, if you think in terms of the relations between, I mean, other things too that structure quite normal ideas about gender relations are, I think, in this sense, perversely structured already in the sense that just, I mean, if you really think about it, I mean, to me it seems that there's nothing really that you could say that is only typically female. I mean, in terms of course, if you, not in terms of these physiological real differences that women can give birth, or most women can, and men can't. I mean, that's a real difference, and there are other real physiological differences. But if you think in terms of what is feminine or masculine, I don't think that anything that is humanly speaking important is like this, that only women can or should or do it, or only men do it. I mean, or if maybe you can come up with an example, but to me it seems that this is not true at all. It's not that women and men have exactly the same difficulties and the same challenges and the same, what it's to be a good human being is the same for men and women. It's not that only men should be courageous and not women. Of course, everybody should be courageous, and most of us are not. We are cowards in different ways. But courage is not like typically female or typically male, or kindness or whatever good thing you can think of. It's not at all typically tied to one sex or one gender or the other. And then that we give it like specific gender typical forms is then, that's a fact, but I think it's also a problem. Or let's say, at least it has this precisely this perverse structure that we want to create a difference between men and women that isn't really there. And again, and why do we want to do that? Because it starts obviously very early, maybe the minute the child is born or already before it, you start thinking about your son or your daughter in different ways, where you wouldn't have to, but we do. And then in kindergarten or whatever, when there's this obvious like groups are created between where the boys are with the boys and the girls are with the girls. I mean, it's not that this always happens, but very typically it does. So what that means, isn't it? I think is that you and it creates a kind of strange paradox about heterosexuality, about homosexuality in a different way too, but about heterosexuality, that so you grow up as a little boy or a little girl, and then so if I'm a little boy, the little girls are like at the same time my enemies, and it's like presented as something completely different from me that I as a boy can never understand. And think of this like typical playground kindergarten scenario where you have this, at least we had this in Finland, I don't know if maybe it's only a Finnish thing, but I wouldn't think so. So, you have like this game where all the girls are trying to catch the boys or the reverse, and then they take them to a prison and kiss them. When you are small, like 7-year-olds or whatever. This kind of, so there's a war between the sexes, right? And it's of course, the whole point is that it's not just a war. It's not that you hate the other as an enemy, but they are somehow the enemy, but somehow also you want to get caught, of course. You want to be kissed, but again, so this is the same perverse structure that you have to pretend that you don't really want it, because in one sense you don't really want it, but you do want it also. So there's this kind of, instead of just kissing somebody, you have to pretend that you were forced to do it. And that and the one who is kissing is also pretending that they are only doing it because this is war and this is what you do with the enemy that you have caught. So this kind of creation of an idea of misunderstanding and strangeness between the sexes. It's created. It's not there from the beginning, I think. So you create that. And then these two groups, this boy and this girl, who have been brought up to think of each other as somehow unintelligible, that I am, as a boy and then as a man, can never really understand women. I mean, this is very typical, right? And women think the same about men. So why? First you create this, and then these two strangers that you have made strangers to each other are supposed to, get together and find happiness. After you have first convinced them that they can never really understand each other, or that women are completely strange creatures. And all this bullshit that's always, goes on about, women, you can't live with them, you can't live without them. This kind of, and women, of course, say exactly the same thing about men. I think this is like it's made up. It's not true. It wouldn't have to be there in any sense at all. So the question is, why do we feel a need, a desire to split people up from each other in this way? And that's, I think, it's not, I don't say I have the ultimate answer to this, but it's clearly that we do feel this kind of need. And again, what I think it does is to, the function of it is, or what it means is that we depersonalize our relationships, and make it in this sense safe. That if you have this idea that you can never really understand as a man, that you can never really understand a woman, even your wife. Of course, this creates an idea of a split that you can never really reach each other. So it's like with the prostitute or like with the shoe fetishist, that the other person is like taken away, and you imagine that you can never really she's somehow there, but in another sense not. And this gives a kind of feeling of safety, but of course also a feeling of strangeness and unhappiness. And because it makes it impossible, the only thing that is really good between human beings, that we actually do understand and reach each other and are not strangers. So there's this kind of, and of course it's not, again the point is that it's in this kind of splitting and depersonalization, that it's not simply that you want to make the other completely strange. It's that they should still be there, because that would be terrible. And everybody knows that that's a horrible marriage, for instance, if two people are like really complete strangers to each other. So you don't want that, but then you want to have a kind of safety option all the time to say, but when things get difficult because you are getting too close to each other, then you can like hide behind this idea that you can't, this is because you can't really understand each other. So you want to get close but not too close, yeah.
Thinking about perversion and social construction, I think that recently on our post-moral society, maybe you've heard about liquid society.
Yeah.
And we are like overestimating individuality and also selfishness. In that sense, we are valuing much more our pleasure
Yeah.
than being with other and respecting them, right? In that sense, we are normalizing detachment from humanity. I think that in that case, individuality and selfishness are like the enemy of love.
Yeah.
I think it's kind of being normalized.
Yeah. Yeah. Or maybe I mean it's being normalized in one particular way now in our society, but I think every society somehow normalizes at least or creates this kind of split between. I mean, if you take the genders, the sexes, I don't know of any society that wouldn't create these huge differences between men and women. They look different, of course. The details are different in different societies, but they are, I think. Maybe there's one or two examples of cultures where they almost don't do that. But in most cultures, primitive cultures and civilizations, sophisticated civilizations, we human beings always seem to feel a need to create differences between the sexes that aren't there naturally at all. That only women. This is women's work. This is men's work, and it's completely impossible for a man to do a woman's work. Although it's obviously completely possible, because they do it, for instance, if there are no women around. So, we create this. Cultures claim that things are impossible, that are quite clearly possible, and that would be normally done unless they were prohibited in this sense. Every culture has enormous amounts of taboos about how men and women can relate to each other. This kind of, which is again, it's not natural in any sense. It's just, but nature is like much more fluid, as it were, than cultures are. Cultures are just create these very rigid norms for whose function it is to keep people apart. I think a lot, not the only function, but a lot of it is to keep men and women apart, to make a clear difference between children and adults, and all this means splitting within every single person. That as a man you have to take away from yourself everything that is regarded in your culture as feminine, and as a woman you have to take away everything. All your natural responses that are regarded as masculine, you have to repress and take away, because otherwise you're not a real woman. And of course you can say that you're not a real woman. You say that only to somebody who is a woman, of course. So it's quite clear. You have a woman here, but she's not a real woman unless she has taken away all these traits that are regarded as masculine. But surely it's true that this happens in maybe a different way in our culture now. For instance, because it does seem that we are now beginning to more and more claim and maybe really think that there are not real differences between the genders. Or for instance, at least, well, it's complicated because, of course, now many people think that you should choose your gender as well, right? That it's not. No, you have to decide what you would like to be, and then you will be. And we have the technological means to do it. So if you're born as a boy or look like a boy, as it were, you can then just change it into a girl if you want to. So, which in a one sense makes genders more fluid, and in another sense, of course, it doesn't at all, because it's like that you absolutely know, I know inside that I'm a girl, although I was born, I look like a boy. So, I mean, this is a very essentialist idea of what genders are, that there is something to be a woman that's completely different from being a man. So in that sense, it doesn't make it more fluid, it makes it more rigid in a sense. But there is, and there is a kind of individualism, of course, in our culture that's different from most cultures. That this whole idea of choice, precisely, that you should choose your career. You should, of course, we should all choose who we, if we wish to be with somebody, if we wish to marry somebody. All this we should choose, and nobody should tell us. I mean, our parents can't tell us. In most cultures, that has been the case, that the parents arrange marriages. So we, of course, like don't accept this. So there's this kind of idea that you choose completely for yourself, but then, of course, in fact, people don't choose at all for themselves because of all this, you know, how our desires are shaped and formed by collective ideologies, fantasies about, what's that? Yeah, social constructions, which are, you know, all in a way have this perverse structure because they're always saying, you know, telling people that you can only be that or that or that. And then if you afterwards say, and now you can choose your own perversion, which is what our culture now tells us, I don't think it doesn't make us any freer, really. It's just a different kind of slavery. Like you can, it's not that your parents say that now you should always live in that cell. Our culture says that there are all these cells you can choose between. You know, it's still a prison, but I can choose my own cell. So I don't know if this is not real freedom. I think, and I think that always that, you know, social norms can never, of course, create freedom, because real freedom is just what exists only between, you know, human beings. I can be free in relation to somebody if I dare to be free. I have to, you know, have the humility or the courage or whatever you want to call it to show the other person who I am and to want to know who they are. I mean, and that nobody can give like that freedom to me. I have to take it. I have to actually show myself and try to, you know, be myself with the other. Nobody can give it to me. So the only thing a culture can do is say it can like permit different things. Let's say not long ago it wasn't permitted to be homosexual openly, and now you can be. So of course it's a kind of freedom, but it doesn't, you know, you can still be homosexual and be completely inhibited and completely unfree as a person, obviously, even though you can like live out your, you don't have to hide in a closet, but that doesn't really make you free. It just takes away a certain kind of social pressure in certain directions. And it's also, I think, very striking also how always when it seems that always when social regulations become more permissive so that not so many things are forbidden anymore, it's never that society just says, now you can be whatever you like. I mean, take this very basic thing, the way in which it used to be. I mean, you could say that up until the 1960s, sexual morality was very strict in, you know, most things were forbidden. Only vanilla sexuality was permitted, and then only between married people, basically, I mean, all the way up to the 60s. And so then it changed very fast, not, you know, maybe not as fast in Peru as in some other countries, but I mean, but basically all across the industrialized modern world, it has changed, right? So now you can do all kinds of things, but what it meant in practice was really not just that now you can do all kinds of things. It, like Foucault has said and many other people have said, it meant that now you must do all kinds of things. There's a kind of demand that before everything was forbidden and now everything is compulsory. You know, you have to try this and that in sexuality, and you have to choose your gender, you have to. So there's a kind of, this permissiveness is really a kind of demand on the members of the culture. So it's not real, again, it's not real freedom. There's a kind of demand that certain things must be now tried and decided and so on.
Yes, referring to that, what do you personally think about Seattle's theory of
Sorry, whose theory? Yeah, actually, I mean, I know the book, but I haven't read it. Have you read it? So then he can answer for me.
Thinking about this demanding, like this
Yeah.
positivity, like era, like always positive, always permissive,
Yeah.
quality open, we have different objects to get satisfied. What do you think about this culture that this person is author talks about how capitalism controls and know how to manage satisfaction, like sexual satisfaction, this coming or this power of coming or into organs. What do you think about that?
Yeah. Well, I think you can answer it without.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. Cheers. Yeah. So I think it's obvious that capitalism is, of course, a kind of machine for creating desires and needs that are not real needs in people. And why? Well, because that's the way you make money out of people. That you have to convince us that all kinds of things that people used to do for themselves are better done by buying a product that does it instead, or buying a service. I mean, that's how capitalism makes money, and how it all the time colonizes more and more of life. Ultimately, I mean, this is also, there's obviously, for instance, there's no private life basically left. Everything we do online is not private anymore, because that's, and everything that is private, everything that you or I do for ourselves is, of course, a problem for a capitalist. If I do something myself, it means they can't make money out of it. So they have to actively try to make us do nothing by ourselves, and to make us despise things we do for ourselves. That is, I come here with something, I don't know, food my mother made. That's terrible, so I should buy it from a store instead. I mean, so that there's an active kind of constant colonization of every aspect of life in capitalism. But again, and of course, it's not freedom, because it's not that it just permits us to do all kinds of things. It's that it demands that we buy everything, that nothing should be done that isn't paid for. So it's not freedom, but it does create, of course, a kind of surface, pluralism of desires and needs. And
I mean, the imperative of joy you have. I mean, this is the Bauman, for instance. When it was a production society, then the imperative that you shouldn't enjoy work, ethics. Now, when you're a consumer society, your first duty is to enjoy, is to consume, enjoy products. In that sense, it's exactly built on the idea of sexual enjoyment, where orgasm, you enjoy, you come, and then it's empty, and then you have to enjoy again. You come, empty, and the faster that is, the more economy grows. The more you click on your phone.
Yeah. But by the way, it's interesting also how, of course, in a quite obvious sense, I think that advertisements for things, or that the role that consumer products have, that it's exactly like the shoe for the shoe fetishist. And you can see that also in the interesting, I think, a very striking way in which when you sell products, you don't. I mean, it used to be much more that you would actually show the actual product and say, this is great. But nowadays, what you show is always just, I mean, at least in Finland, I haven't really noticed whether this is true here too, but you show human beings, just happy faces, and then somewhere it says that this is, Inca Cola or whatever, will make all these people happy. But so you sell these things as a kind of magic way in which you will become happy and good-looking and enviable in the way these people, happy people, and the advertisements are. So all these products, obviously the only way you can sell them is by loading them with this kind of interpersonal human significance, with love, in a way you could say. This is what will happen. You have Inca Cola and everybody will be happy. And again, it's completely bizarre, of course, like all fantasies are, that if you think about it rationally, nobody can believe this. I mean, obviously, how would, you don't become happy just because you have Inca Cola or whatever. But we seem to be able to believe it nonetheless, because otherwise the advertisements wouldn't work.
bourgeoisie, that they like the real culture
Yeah.
comes from these bourgeois people, and they like bring it to us, or we are forced into us. Could you refer to that? Or
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting question because, I mean, can't you say that in one sense, no, I mean, nothing really important is ever forced on us? Because, I mean, if you think, if you have a situation where something is just forced on you, let's say you're in prison and they are prison guards and they will beat you up if you do certain things. Then you can, of course, you just do what they command you to do because you don't want to get beaten up. But you actually don't think, in that kind of situation, it would really be forced from the outside only. You don't think that they have really any right to do, tell you this and beat you up. But they will do, so you will maybe conform. But you don't think you don't think it's legitimate. You don't, for instance, feel ashamed if you do something that they have forbidden. Immediately, if you think that now they don't see us, now we can do whatever we like. So that's one situation, but that's not the normal situation in culture. I mean, because, for instance, immediately, if it's the case that your parents or the general bourgeois culture or whatever, as it were, tells you that this is the kind of person you should be, then if you respond to that injunction, to what they tell you, by feeling ashamed when you are not like that. It can just be something that you can't do anything about. That you start studying at a bourgeois school and you're working class and the way you talk is not the way it should be. And you can't help it because this is, you talk the way people talk from where you came. You can't help it, but you might very well feel ashamed about it. And that means if you feel ashamed, it means that you have already accepted their view of you, right? I mean, you yourself feel that you are somehow a bad person because you don't speak in the right way. And that means that you have accepted the ideology, the view of you that they want to force on you. And that means that you are not forced to feel ashamed. You accept, you want to be seen like them, and then you try to learn to speak in the right proper way. But there's no necessity to respond like that, of course, because you could also say, I mean, you could tell these fucking bourgeois assholes that, this is the way I talk, what's the problem? You can't speak like me, so, why do you think I should feel ashamed? I mean, that's possible to respond in that way, obviously, that you don't accept at all they're trying to use power on you and make you conform, and you don't have to accept it. I mean, you could accept it again in just an outward sense that you don't, but that would mean you don't feel ashamed, you don't feel guilt, you don't feel like a bad person just because they tell you. If you feel those things, that means that you have accepted something. You have started playing their game. And if you do that, then it means you are never forced to do that, and whatever then happens is not something that they force you to do. It's something you accept. And I think most of what goes on in culture has this aspect that the oppressed, who are in some sense obviously are oppressed, accept their oppression. Because otherwise it would never be possible for a small group of oppressors to oppress lots of people, unless the people who are oppressed basically accepted that they are, in their rightful place, that these people who are on top are better than we who are on the bottom. So in that sense, oppression is always, I think, or tends to be always internalized, and that means accepted by the people who are subject to it.
So in that sense, the vanilla sex, it's more comfortable talking about vanilla sex than other types of sexuality.
Yeah.
So that would be the reason. The reason would be that, the bourgeoisie culture is it's implanted in us. It's like we have accepted and we have normalized vanilla sex.
Yeah.
That can explain that.
Yeah. It explains certain things, but again, I think there's always the question, why you or I, as a particular individual, why do we accept these kinds of things? I mean, why do we? So it's not implanted in the sense, it's not that it cannot be implanted without us knowing, and the acceptance is something we ourselves do. It's not, that doesn't come from outside. But of course it's never a conscious choice. Again, if you start feeling ashamed because some people are trying to shame you. It's of course not that you choose, well, now I will start feeling ashamed. It's something that seems to happen to you, but it is a kind of choice still, because you wouldn't have to respond in that way.
The question always that, I mean, the basic logic of how does anyone at all become an authority? And authority exactly in the sense that someone is an authority in this exactly because it's connected to somehow wanting to be seen by this authority, or maybe needing an authority exactly in order to be seen in a certain way, to gain a certain kind of recognition. So of course, I mean, that's maybe a big mystery. How is it that the bourgeois at some point were able to establish themselves as a certain authority or culture or self-understanding and things like that. So that's, I mean,
Yeah, I
it's a
mean,
huge question how that functions, but at least.
and of course it wasn't, before the bourgeois revolutions, it wasn't like that. Before that, the bourgeoisie looked up to the aristocracy and wanted to be like them, and however much money they had, it was never enough. They wanted to use that money to buy, to get their daughter to marry a prince or whatever, because only in that way could you gain real respectability in that culture. In our culture, it's different.